Hey everyone, welcome to Can't Afford to Record, the YouTube channel where we figure out the art of audio production together. I'm Robby Miller, and today I'm getting to sit down with Acey Slade. This was a great opportunity to catch up with Acey about the audio world, hear what is an amazing sounding album to him, and to hear what it's like to get the best out of a band in a recording studio from a producer's standpoint. Now don't forget, you can also go and check out the podcast version of this conversation if you're not into the Zoom conference call quality. I get it, no problem. You can head to Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, search Can't Afford to Record, and you will find the nice lush audio version, but you just won't see our faces, so you're cool. So without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Thanks for checking out Can't Afford to Record. Don't forget to subscribe. I learned a lot from Acey, and I hope you do too, so enjoy. Well everyone, here we are with Acey Slade. How you doing, Acey?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for coming on Can't Afford to Record. I really appreciate it. This might be a little bit of a different podcast to what you may have done before, because we're going to be focusing on audio and on recording and on mixing in general, and just what it's like to be in and out of a studio and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that, I was thinking today, we obviously occasionally speak back and forth online, but we have crossed paths once before, and it was when I was 13 years old. And you, I don't know if you know this, but you were in a band called the Murderdolls, and quite a big deal in the UK. And you came and did a guitar clinic in my hometown in Bedford, UK. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to go to this guitar clinic. What t-shirt am I going to wear? Which is one of the most important things. And I was thinking there's going to be a lot of kids in Murderdolls t-shirts. There's going to be a lot of kids in Slipknot t-shirts. And there's going to be a lot of kids in Marilyn Manson t-shirts. But I'm going to be the kid in an Alice Cooper t-shirt. So I got my dad's Alice Cooper t-shirt. And I went to the clinic, and there was an opportunity. You were getting people to come up and jam with you. I got up, but as I was coming up, you stopped and pointed at me and you said, I got sent home from school for wearing that exact t-shirt. And it was with Alice, and half of his face is a skull, but still has the eye. Do you remember the one?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. and what's funny is I told Alice later, I said, when we were, when I was in Dope and we were opening for Alice, I told my mom, I was like, yeah, Mom. I was like, you remember, excuse me, remember you were going to let me wear that Alice Cooper t-shirt? She goes, yeah. And I said, well, guess what? I'm opening for Alice Cooper, and I'm going to introduce you, and I'm going to tell him that story. And my mom totally like flipped the script on me. She's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Then I'm going to tell Alice that he needs to start designing better t-shirts. And I'm like, all right, never mind.
Don't embarrass me, Mom.
Exactly. She trumped me on that one, man.
Oh, man. Well, Acey, you're no stranger to a recording studio. You've been in and out of a bunch. You also have taken on producer roles, and you know, there's a lot to do with the behind the scenes of the music world. But my first question for you is, do you remember when you couldn't afford to record?
Oh yeah. I mean, there was a high school battle of the bands, and you had to submit a demo tape. And so me and my friends, we didn't know what a demo tape was. And I remember we rented a 4-track from the local music store, and somebody had lost the manual. We had no idea what to do with this 4-track. Like, imagine you've never seen a 4-track before, and it didn't have a manual. They're like, well, somebody lost it. We're like, well, what are we supposed to, like, we didn't know what to do. So needless to say, that session was a wash. And then after that, it was always, everybody in the band kind of chiming in to, everybody chips in to, pay for a couple hours here and then pay for a couple. I mean, to be fair, that must have really sucked for local studios at the time, because, you're charging a rate and people can't afford it. Knowing what I know now, it's like so much about it is the vibe and the that feeling of not watching the clock. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you have people coming in like, all right, so it would be like one day, like, all right, well, we're gonna get drums to a couple songs, and then that's all we can afford. So we'll have to come back and do drums for another couple songs and stuff like that. Yeah, it was challenging. Good times, but challenging.
Do you remember what it was that you may have recorded on that 4-track? Did you actually get something recorded on it, or did the manual completely stop you?
No.
Wow. Okay, so in that case, do you remember maybe the first song that you got recorded?
Yeah, that would have been. There was a studio in Delaware, like where I grew up in Pennsylvania, wasn't too far from Delaware, and I don't even know how we came across the place, to be honest with you. But I don't remember. I don't remember a lot about it. I just remember the most interesting part was that they had whatever it was, the first digital interface, at that studio. It wasn't even a color monitor. It was like the green, I don't know, TRS 80 or whatever the fuck it was. But I remember seeing that. Whoa, man, that's crazy. So you'll be able to record on a computer soon? and then saying like, well, the technology is not quite there yet.
Now it's most definitely there. Oh, yeah. So you did definitely come up on the punk scene. I feel, and I really wanted to ask you some of these questions. I feel like for punk music, and I want to be careful how I word this, but for punk music, we're not looking for necessarily that pristine, finished sound. Do you think that was quite a liberating way to record music back then, not really having to worry about super high class polished mixes, just the fact of just throwing up the mics and just hitting record and there you go, you got a punk cassette tape?
I think a lot of it was necessity, but it was also I mean, like I said, when we were recording early on, the stuff I was doing was a little bit more rock based, and so it was about getting a cleaner tape. So we weren't doing live in the studio. To be honest with you, I don't think anybody ever suggested that to us. And had someone suggested live in the studio to us, we might have taken them up on that. But it's a strange thing, isn't it? Where it's like some of these old. I think it takes you a long time to develop the ears. And I guess the analogy that I'll use is I remember as a kid listening to some stuff like Motley Crue and Aerosmith at that time were probably doing like Pumped and Permanent Vacation and stuff like that. And I remember them talking about how great these old Aerosmith records sounded. And I went back and listened and I was like, I don't get it. This doesn't sound as good. But a lot of that was mastering.
Right.
And I think it takes you a long time for that charm to grow on. You know what I mean? And and now I don't think that there's anything wrong with either or. My favorite sounding record of all time is the Distillers' Coral Fang.
Okay. Yes.
That's the benchmark to me.
Really? What about that record is like, I want to get that sound? What is it, or what is it that does it for you?
You know what? I feel like it's the perfect balance of honestly recorded tracks, recorded very, very, very well.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it wasn't until we did shows with them last year where I was like, dude, that's my favorite record. Like, if it's one of my records, if it's something that I'm doing, that's the record that I take into the engineer, and I'm like, this is what I want it to sound. This is what I'm going for.
Wow.
For mix or whatever. And just the places where there's a mistake, you just picture in your head that they were just like going for it. It was like, yeah, maybe there's a little mistake. Like nothing's out of tune, nothing's out of key, but you might hear like that fret, like when your finger, when you're playing like a full E and your pinky slides off on the high E string. Or, you hear all that feedback, and especially Brody's voice on that record. So I think that there's a balance of like with the punk recordings, there's a lot of honesty in the takes. The focus is on the honesty. It's not on the perfection.
Right.
And, but sometimes that primitiveness can also get in the way of the listener really listening to the song.
Right. Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I know it's a cliche to say, isn't it? It's just about finding the balance. We just got to find the balance of both vibes. But going back to that, maybe the sort of Aerosmith tracks you're listening to when you're like, well, actually, I'm not too sure this does sound good, or like, is there something wrong with me, or something wrong with my ears? Can you think of a song where you're like, this is an amazing song, but actually it's not really mixed or recorded very well, but it doesn't matter because it's an amazing song, which makes it,
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, a great example is I Want You to Want Me by Cheap Trick, studio version.
Yes.
It's great, but man, it doesn't hold a candle to that live version.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I wonder.
And I guess it's recorded well. You know what I mean? But boy, it's pretty obvious that they took the wind right out of the sails on it.
Yeah, the energy is not there, not as much as obviously as the live version. How interesting. So, when you are in the producer role of things, are you a producer in the traditional sense where you're going to be like, you're going to seek out the engineers, you're going to seek out someone to mix it, you're going to seek out someone to master it, or do you tend to wear all the hats? Are you recording the artist and then taking the tracks home and mixing them as well? Where does your role lay?
It's a bit more in the traditional sense.
Okay.
I'm not an engineer.
Right.
Furthermore, I think that, and it depends on the person, obviously, but I think that for myself, if I were to engineer, not produce, it would be easy to get caught up in the technicalities of it, and then you lose sight of the emotion.
Right.
And to me, that's getting that honest emotion in the take is the most important part.
Right.
And yeah, so I'm definitely not an engineer.
Okay. So yeah, you kind of in that way got a bit of you can take a step back, can't you? You don't have to get too into the nitty gritty of all the automation and whatnot. And so you're seeking out mixing engineers that that are going to really complement the song and get the best sound possible.
Sure. A lot of that it depends on the budget and familiarity, and yeah, those are the two main things, obviously.
So when you hear maybe songs that are done in more of a DIY fashion, maybe people have recorded in their basement at home, is there anything that's usually lacking for you when you hear it? Is there anything that usually isn't quite making it that might make it if it was in a studio environment?
Well, I guess if I understand your question right, like I think that's something that I think is what I'm good at, is
right.
Hearing it be like, I get what you're going for, and here's how you can get there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been producing bands much lately for a few reasons, but one of them is, it is, how can I say this the right way? Obviously the podcast is called I Can't Afford to Record.
Right.
But I think it depends on how good of an engineer you want to be as an artist. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the point I'm going to get at is that right now, the quality level that people expect your music to be is very high.
Right.
So that's the big difference. Like, so if someone were to put, I don't know, like some of the early recordings, like let's just say a Misfits record. If somebody recorded something that sounded like that now, people wouldn't give it a second listen.
Right.
So the expectations are higher, and that's one thing that I say to anybody that I'm going to work with. Like, look, man, it's got to sound awesome. Like, so there are certain places where I don't think that you can really chintz.
Right.
But But that being said, I think that, and there's a lot of people that would prove me wrong. And so, for example, with drums, I still feel like you need live drums in a really good room.
Right.
There are a lot of albums that I've listened to, that you're listening to, that probably weren't real drums at all. That were probably Superior Drummer, whatever.
That's what I'm starting to hear and learn about a lot now.
Yeah, but
there's a lot of samples.
And that for me, again, that's a place where I'm like, yeah, like I like my demos to sound like demos for myself. You know what I'm saying? And then when I go to the actual real recording stage, I like to go in the studio. I'd like to make sure that I have specifically drums. I think I guess because I'm a guitar player and a bass player, I feel more comfortable tracking guitars and bass at home. But drums to me, I feel like need to be in the studio, and also vocals for myself. And that's because if I'm recording my own vocals, I like having someone else there to hit record. And I know it's just a matter of hitting spacebar or whatever most times. But still, there's something about me being able to be in kind of a dark room with better mics and better preamps than I have, and having someone go, and that was a little pitchy. Let's try it again.
Yeah, there's something about coming back and forth from your blanket fort that you've just made in your basement and trying to hit record with a headphone cable that's not quite long enough. It kind of kills the vibe a little bit.
But like I said, but even with that, it's like you can find good places that will probably record your drums for a very affordable rate.
Right.
And if you have, I do, and it's weird because I'm a guitar player and a bass player. I do feel like the one place you can save some money and kind of chintz a little bit is with guitar tones and bass tones. And what I mean by that is that if you're writing songs for the masses, for the audiences, they don't really care about your guitar tone.
Right.
I do feel like they feel the drums, and I do feel like they feel the vocals.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Are you a Pro Tools guy? Are you a Logic guy? Or
I know how to use Pro Tools, but at home I use GarageBand, which
Perfect.
honestly makes me want to start to dip my toes into Logic, because I find myself, again, it's one of those things where I was really great on Pro Tools, and when that, it's so funny how these things, it's so weird to talk about things like Pro Tools in such an antiquated way, in that there was a time where there were antiquated ways of doing Pro Tools. There's a time where Pro Tools was a very expensive program. And you had a cracked version and cracked plugins, and GarageBand sucked. But now GarageBand is like pretty awesome, and it works great for demos. Like,
yes.
And so now I'm like, well, if I'm really getting used to GarageBand and really kind of figuring this out, and Logic's kind of the next step, maybe I just go there and stop using Pro Tools. I don't know. Like, I know a lot of the issues that they used to have with Pro Tools versus Logic have really been kind of smoothed over. So
yeah, I mean, I use Logic, but GarageBand, as you say, you wouldn't have got that as a free program 20 years ago.
No.
The features and what it can do is incredible. I moved up to Logic, which seems to be more and more becoming, I don't know if it will ever quite be Pro Tools industry standard, but I think I remember seeing that, a part of the latest Foo Fighters record was done on Logic, and
I believe that.
It seems to be becoming more and more of the norm.
Well, and the likely thing is that, as younger engineers come up, these younger engineers are going through that same path of starting on GarageBand, moving into Logic.
Yeah.
Where, the engineers that I grew up with, I mean, they really shunned Logic and GarageBand, and it's like Pro Tools only. But those people are going to be dinosaurs soon. So
yeah. Are you opposed to, because just getting back to trying to get a live drum sound and whatnot. Are you opposed to tuning vocals, or would you rather just keep going at it until we got the take?
Depends on the singer,
Right.
you know.
And depends on the genre as well, I guess.
Yeah, and so like with vocals, I mean, I think someone like Joe Strummer or even Mick Jagger, like you don't want to pitch correct with those guys.
No.
Like Mick Jagger, like he just slides to the note so slowly that I don't know, it probably sound weird. Although I don't know, maybe they pitch correct his vocals now, but yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it.
Right.
And as far as like you know, drums, I mean, I that's a tough call because I've been in situations where, I mean, well, let's put it this way: once you decide on the drum track, you have to commit to it. So I've done sessions before where the engineer, like later on, has been like, "Hey, I noticed that fill was a little off, so I fixed it." It's like, well, now I got to go back and fix the guitars and the bass.
Right.
And now, well, no, we can just slide those. And now, okay, so now you're moving shit around and
Yeah. No, it's all got to be kind of moved at the same time, or be in the
yeah,
same.
well, I don't think it should be moved, I guess is the point. It's like
Right.
once the drums, I'm not opposed to moving the drums before you record everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But once, I think that's also a way of kind of limiting your time too. You're
Right.
like, all right, well, like this is put to bed. It's, you know.
Yeah, otherwise you can spend days, weeks, months going back over the same thing, or agonizing over the same thing, and perhaps it was just in the moment, which actually leads me on to my next question. Can you think of any sort of happy accidents that have happened in the studio where something's happened, but actually it kind of made the song great?
Whew. Nothing comes to mind because I'm a bit of I feel like my goal as when I produce someone is to make sure everybody is prepared as much in advance as they
Yes.
can be. Because like, you know, Dave Grohl hasn't hit me up to produce a Foo Fighters record yet.
Right, right.
Dave, call me.
He's a long time listener of this podcast. He'll definitely hear this.
Okay, right. But you know, it's a lot of times it's working for bands, working with bands that don't really have a budget.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like number one, it's my responsibility to save the money in the studio, depending on how we work out the finances of it. But to save that time in the studio, they got to be prepared in the rehearsal.
Right.
You know what I mean? So a big thing that I'm into is, you know, coming to rehearsals, hearing the demos, sitting down, figuring out the BPMs in advance, figuring out the key in advance, and then that way when we walk in, it's really easy to set up the session and, you know, hit record and start firing away. And again, I feel like that gives you that. If you make a mistake because you were just really feeling it and you were going for it, like let's say your drummer is just like sweat's pouring off of him or her and they're just crushing it, and you go back and you listen, the first part was a little bit off, but I know the guy knows how to play the fucking song.
Right.
It feels right that he sped up in that last chorus on the outro. It feels right. That's because he knew how to do it. Know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, but if it's like, if you walk in, it's like, yeah, that guy, like, that's not how you played that normally, dude. Like, you're playing it wrong. So, preparation to me is a big part of it. So that way, it saves time, saves money. Everybody knows what they're doing. And if there are any of those beautiful little honest mistakes where there's the drummer sped up on the outro, you can leave it because you can all put your head on the pillow and go, no, like, we meant to do that.
Right.
And that's how I was feeling at the time. So,
right. So really, we're sort of saying post-production, which also, as you as a producer, I guess also allows you to create a relationship with the band if you might not know them very well as well, right? Because you're going to perhaps be in some of those earlier rehearsals, getting to know the songs, and then bringing it into the studio where everyone's prepared and also where everyone's comfortable with each other as well, and whatnot. So post-production, you're sort of saying is a really big part of capturing that sound, capturing that song.
yes.
Excellent. Last question for you then, or a last couple of questions. who is the dream person to produce? If you have to produce with an artist or produce an artist's song, who would it be?
Wow. I guess because I love that Distillers album so much, I'd love to produce them.
Right.
Yeah, and the benchmark is so high. I feel like I would be so disappointed, whatever it is that I did. um, and I guess I've really become a bigger fan of Brett Gruwitz. I always feel like I'm saying his name wrong, but from Bad Religion, he does
Oh,
all the Epitaph records and he does all the Rancid records, and it's weird. I guess I've always been sort of a fan of his, but I mean, those Rancid records always sound great,
mhm.
as do the Bad Religion records, and I think that those records are a great example of like punk rock records, like those stacked vocal harmonies. Jesus, I mean, they rival Queen, you know,
Right.
and still punk rock, you know.
Yeah.
So I'd love to you know. I've worked with some great producers, and they all have different different ways of working, and I'd love to see how he works. You
Hmm.
know, and to be fair, it's really interesting because they did the one record that he did that I wasn't crazy about. They did it at the Skywalker Ranch Studios, which
Right.
is which is where George Lucas owned an amazing recording studio, and that was kind of the whole point of it. Like, oh wow, we're in this amazing recording studio that George Lucas owned, and that record sounded a little flat to me. I think
Right.
the place was too nice, you know.
Interesting. Wow. Um, when you produce your own albums and your own music, is there a certain thing that holds you back a little bit? Is there sort of a perfectionist approach to some of it, or are you able to disconnect with your own songs? Or ideally, would you get a producer in? Would you like to pick a producer to come and do some stuff?
Yeah, like I wouldn't mind having a second producer, but right now when I work here um, in New York, I work with a guy named Tom Camuso.
Okay.
Uh, Tom was Lenny Kravitz's in-house guy
Wow.
for a long time. He's got some amazing stories about working with Lenny. Um, and so basically, he did I think Lenny's first 3 albums, and he's just done a bunch of other stuff too. Grammy Award-winning engineer producer.
Hmm.
Um, but I work with him, and we have a relationship now where he can kind of give different opinions. You know,
Right.
generally, an engineer, your job is to not really have an opinion. You
Right.
know what I mean? But Tom and I, we have a great relationship, and I really like working with him. Um, yeah, he's awesome.
What about that relationship works? What about his, the opinions and the comments back and forth is gets the best out of you, do you think, when it comes to recording music?
Well, I mean, he we're about the same age. We have similar taste in music. We can bust each other's balls. He can tell me like, dude, that sounded like shit. Try it again, and
Right.
I won't take it personally. You
Right.
know, he loves Mexican food. It's a great restaurant near his house. Um,
I
yeah.
think that's it, isn't it? That's what makes it perfect is the fact there's a Mexican restaurant right near his house.
Oh, and a great coffee shop. Like I've got. Yeah, I love recording this spot. That's my go-to place.
Nice.
It's yeah. So first of all, Tom's a great engineer. Uh, it's that perfect balance of like there's a lot of restaurants and coffee shops nearby, but at the same time there's not a bunch of distractions. Like when we did the second Dope record, we were like right in the heart of Hollywood. There are just so
Right.
many distractions, at least for me. Like, you never knew who was gonna like pop in, who's gonna stick their head in the door, or maybe they're party the night before or whatever. And so there are a lot of fun distractions,
Hmm.
distractions nevertheless, at least for me.
Right. Right. Um, and I just want to sort of finish up with asking you how Catfight Coffee is going, and
Ah,
and and how all of that's coming together.
thank you. It's going great. It's going really good. Yeah, Considering we've only been a company for a couple months, and I had another coffee company for about 2 years before that, but so it's not a new thing for me.
Right.
But it is a new company, and it's going awesome. We're really, it's a lot like anything. Like it's a lot like putting a record together in a weird way. Like, I look at our bags as album covers or album art.
Mm-hmm.
I look at our bags are something that people would want to display on the wall, as opposed to just putting the cover in clothes. And then furthermore, like, the care that we take to roast the coffee, um, is a lot like the recording process.
Right.
Tedious. It's funny. There is a really cool music analogy. There was a record that a band put out, and it's one of the best, like, not pieces of advice, but nuggets that I ever got about music. It's so funny. This band put out a record. It's a band that me and my friends all loved, and it wasn't that great. And then a friend and I were talking, and I was like, yeah, I went back and revisited that 2007 record, and it's still not that good. I was kind of hoping that I would revisit it. It would be cool. And he said, I knew that record wasn't going to be that great before I even put it on. I said, well, how'd you know that? He's like, well, look at the album cover. The album cover is just like a skull and crossbones. And he's like, well, if they didn't put any thought into the album cover, what's to make me think that they put any thought or care into what's on the album? And I apply that to so many business things that I do. I apply that to my coffee. It's like, well, granted, there is this shishi aesthetic to some coffee things where it's very minimalist and very stark. And that's cool too. But that ain't us, we're rock and roll people. And so it's like, well, if I just, don't put any thought into the packaging, it's going to make people think that I didn't put any thought into the coffee. Just like the album.
That's an amazing point. Yeah, you don't really. I guess that's such an obvious thing now that you mention it, but when you think about like the records on the wall, like what's going to make you buy that album? When you were, I mean, slightly before my time, but if you go into a record store and there's all the vinyl records and LPs on the wall, which one are you going to buy? You're going to buy or be gravitated to one that looks the best.
Sure.
Interesting.
And you can tell right away, like, and it's true. It's like, I remember as a kid, like flipping through the vinyl bins, you see a record, it's like, yeah, it's album cover art. Isn't that great? And it would be true. It's like, so the album cover art that my friend was talking about, it wasn't that it was bad. It's just there was a lot of thought put in.
Right. Well, and, I was thinking about this earlier as well. With Catfight Coffee, you're actually doing your bit for the recording industry because, of course, you're keeping recording engineers and producers up late at night. They need to finish those mixes off, helping them get through the last mix.
Sure, man. Those late night sessions keep it going.
Absolutely. Well, look, Acey, thanks so much for being on Can't Afford to Record. I really, really appreciate it. Best of luck with everything as well. I am a purchaser of Catfight Coffee. I really, really love what you're doing there. It tastes great as well. And yeah, I'm just super into it. And just thanks for spending the time and talking about some recording experiences and just different sounds. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right. I'll speak to you soon, man.
Awesome. Thanks.